The neon reflection on the wet boardwalk pavement was so bright I could see my own face in it, distorted and pale, looking exactly as terrified as I felt. My hands trembled as I gripped the strap of my canvas portfolio, the heavy buckles digging into my shoulder hard enough to bruise. I focused on that stinging pain, anything to distract from the rising bile in my throat. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. I'd been selling my charcoal sketches here for 3 months, always packing up before sunset, always invisible. Today, a sudden summer squall had delayed the crowds and forced me to stay late to make my booth rent. Of course, because my life wasn't complicated enough without walking the one stretch of Asbury Park where Richie might be drinking. The promenade stretched before me like a gauntlet, all flashing arcade lights and the smell of frying dough that hung heavy in the humid air. My worn sneakers squeaked on the damp wood, announcing my presence, marking me as prey in the open. I kept my head down, counting distance. 40 feet to the curb. Then I could dive into my Uber, lock the doors, and disappear back into my tiny, anonymous studio apartment. 40 feet. I could manage that. Shannon. The voice froze me mid-step. My stomach dropped. That familiar, slurring baritone with the jagged edge of anger turning my blood to ice water. I didn't turn around. Maybe if I kept walking, the humidity would swallow the sound. Maybe reality would bend just this once in my favor. Shannon, stop. I know you hear me. Boots hit the wood behind me, heavy and uneven, the distinctive thud of a hunt. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I clutched my portfolio tighter and walked faster. 20 feet to the street. Just 20 more feet. Don't you dare walk away from me. His hand clamped onto my upper arm, spinning me around with enough force that my portfolio swung out, nearly knocking me off balance. Richie looked exactly as he had 6 months ago when I'd finally filed the restraining order. Jeans stained with grease, eyes bloodshot and watery, looking at me with that terrifying mix of pleading and rage. The familiar, suffocating stench of stale beer and cheap musk made my stomach turn. I'm going home, Richie, I said, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of me. 500 feet? His laugh was a bark, sharp and bitter. Like you didn't used to beg me to stay close? Just vanished one day, changed your locks, called the cops on me? We were a team, Shannon. We were never a team. I took a step back toward the curb, trying to put air between us. I asked you to leave. The judge told you to leave. The judge. He spat the word onto the boardwalk planks. 2 years I took care of you, and you let a judge tell me where I can stand? Do you have any idea how that makes me look? How the guys at the garage look at me? The thing about Richie was that the universe always shrank down to his ego, to his reputation, to how my survival inconvenienced him. I'd spent 2 years shrinking myself to fit into his volatile moods, painting in the dark so the smell of turpentine wouldn't annoy him. The day I'd packed my paints and left had been the first time I'd seen colors clearly in years. I'm leaving, I said, spotting the sleek black sedan idling at the curb. My Uber. Let me go. You owe me a conversation. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist this time. Hard. Hard enough to leave a mark. I jerked back, and my other hand flailed. My phone slipped from my sweaty palm, hitting the wooden planks with a sickening crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. Look what you made me do, he sneered. Now you can't call your little cop friends. My vision narrowed. The neon lights of the boardwalk faded as my focus tunneled to his hand on my wrist, to the sensation of the cage locking shut. This was how it ended. Not with a scream, but with a shattered phone and a dark street. No. Let go. The scream tore out of my throat, primal and sharp enough that a group of tourists stopped to stare. Richie flinched, his grip loosening just a fraction. Stop making a scene, Shannon. You're crazy. Just come to the truck, we'll talk. I'm not going anywhere with you. I wrenched my arm free. The black sedan was right there. 10 feet. Hazard lights flashing. If I could just reach that door handle, I could survive this night. I lunged. Richie lunged after me, his boots slipping on the wetwood. I ripped the back door open and threw myself onto the beige leather, the air conditioning hitting me like a physical shock. Drive. I screamed, slamming the door shut. Just drive. The car didn't move. The silence inside was absolute, a terrifying vacuum compared to the chaos outside. In the rearview mirror, I didn't see a confused Uber driver. I saw dark, predatory eyes watching me with zero surprise. Thud click. The sound echoed through the chassis. The locks. I gasped, reaching for the handle, but it was dead. The man in the driver's seat turned slowly, his expensive suit straining against broad shoulders. It wasn't a gig worker. It was Casimiro Sabatini, the wolf of the waterfront. He looked at me, then at Richie pounding on the window, and smirked. "You picked the wrong car, Tesoro," he said, his voice low and smooth like velvet dragged over gravel. Or maybe, the right one. Chapter 1. The Promenade Panic. The humidity in Asbury Park didn't just hang in the air, it clung to you like a second skin. I wiped charcoal dust onto my jeans, ignoring the screaming seagulls diving for dropped French fries near my booth. My fingers ached, stiff from 6 hours of sketching tourists who haggled over $5 portraits. I smoothed out the crumpled bills in my lockbox. $65. My landlord wanted $800 by Tuesday, or I was out on the street. "One more," I whispered, scanning the thinning crowd. Just one more sale. The boardwalk smelled of funnel cake sugar and low tide, a sickeningly sweet mixture that turned sour in the heat. A group of teenagers laughed near the railing, and for a second, I envied their obliviousness. They didn't have to watch the shadows. They didn't have to calculate exit routes every time they entered a room. Then, the air changed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, a primal alarm system I'd honed over 2 years of walking on eggshells. I looked past the arcade's flashing neon sign. 50 yards down, the crowd parted like water hitting a stone. Richie. He wasn't storming toward me. He was weaving, his heavy work boots dragging slightly on the wooden planks. He stopped to glare at a hot dog vendor, his jaw set in that familiar, terrifying clench. He looked like a storm cloud in a dirty flannel shirt, darker and heavier than everything around him. My heart slammed against my ribs. He'd found me. The restraining order was just a piece of paper. It couldn't stop a fist. Forget the rent. Forget the sketches. I scrambled, shoving my charcoal sticks into my bag with trembling hands. A stick of compressed carbon snapped, coating my fingers in black dust. "Shannon." His voice cut through the noise of the carnival games, jagged and slurring. He had spotted me. I didn't wait to zip the bag. I swung the heavy portfolio over my shoulder and bolted, abandoning my easel. My sneakers slapped against the weathered boards as I wove through the confused crowd, my breath hitching in my throat. I needed to get to the street. I needed to get away. The hunt was on. The sound of Richie's fist connecting with the window should have been terrifying. It should have been the loud, cracking thud that haunted my nightmares. But inside the sedan, the noise was dull and distant, a muted thump like a stone dropped into deep water. The glass didn't even vibrate. I pressed myself into the corner of the back seat, my spine digging into the plush beige leather. The air conditioning was set to a clinically low temperature, freezing the sweat on my neck and sending a violent shiver through my adrenaline-soaked body. It smelled different in here, no frying grease or ocean rot. Just the sterile, rich scent of new leather and a hint of sandalwood cologne that cost more than my life savings. Outside, the boardwalk was a blur of neon and panic. Richie was shouting, his mouth contorted into a snarl, veins bulging in his neck, but inside the car, it was dead silent. A hermetically sealed capsule of calm. The man in the driver's seat didn't even flinch at the maniac pounding on his vehicle. He just shifted the gear stick with a hand adorned by a heavy gold signet ring and pressed the accelerator. The engine purred a low, throaty growl of pure power, and we slid away from the curb, leaving Richie shrinking in the red glow of the taillights. Wait, before we see what Casimiro does next, I have a quick challenge for you. My friends told me there's no way we could reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of this month. They think people don't care about these stories of resilience anymore. Let's prove them wrong. If you're enjoying this Jersey-style thriller, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's show them what this community can do together. As the car merged seamlessly into the Saturday night traffic, the relief I expected never came. Instead, a new, colder dread settled in my stomach. I looked at the back of the driver's head. His hair was thick, dark, and styled with precision. His suit jacket was draped over the passenger seat, revealing a crisp white dress shirt that strained against broad, powerful shoulders. This wasn't a rideshare. This was a predator's den. I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror again. They were dark, assessing, and utterly devoid of fear. He wasn't looking at the road. He was watching me. "Please," I whispered, my voice sounding small in the cavernous interior. "You can just let me out at the corner." I made a mistake. "We all make mistakes, Bella," he said. His voice was deep, rolling through the quiet car. Getting in was a mistake. Getting out there, he gestured vaguely toward the dark streets of Asbury, would be a tragedy. "I need to go to the police station," I said, clutching my portfolio like a shield. "My ex, he violated a restraining order. I need to report it." Casimiro chuckled, a dry sound that had no humor in it. He turned the wheel, guiding the massive car away from the main drag and toward the industrial district near the inlet. "No police." "What?" Panic flared again, sharp and hot. "He attacked me. I have to." I said, "No police," Casimiro interrupted, his tone shifting from velvet to steel. He finally glanced back at the road, his profile sharp and imperious under the passing streetlights. "Police mean reports. Reports mean paperwork. And paperwork means questions. I don't like questions." "I don't care what you like." I snapped, the terror making me reckless. I reached for the door handle again, pulling uselessly against the lock. "Let me out." "Who do you think you are?" The car slowed, pulling up to a red light. Casimiro turned in his seat to face me fully for the first time. The shadows cut across his face, highlighting the sharp jawline and the heavy brow. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. I'd seen his face in the newspapers, usually accompanying headlines about racketeering charges that miraculously got dropped or waterfront deals that defied city zoning laws. Casimiro Sabatini, the man who owned the shoreline. "I think," he said softly, "I am the man who just saved you from a beating." "You're shaking, Shannon." He knew my name. "How do you?" I trailed off, pressing myself harder against the door. "I know everyone who works on my boardwalk," he said simply. "Now, sit back. We're taking a detour. You have a problem with your ex. I have a problem with the zoning board. Perhaps we can solve each other's puzzles." He turned back to the wheel, the locks clicking once more as the light turned green. I was safe from Richie, yes. But I had jumped straight into the mouth of the wolf. The car didn't stop at my apartment, and it certainly didn't stop at the police precinct. We drove past the populated streets, past the safety of streetlights and 24-hour diners, until the asphalt turned into gravel. The sedan crunched to a halt in front of a chain-link gate topped with razor wire. A massive sign zip-tied to the mesh-red Sabatini development, future site of the Azure. Beyond the gate, a skeletal giant rose against the night sky. It was a high-rise in the making, 20 stories of exposed steel girders and poured concrete that looked like the ribcage of some prehistoric beast washed up by the Atlantic. "Get out," Casimiro said, killing the engine. "You're going to kill me," I said, the realization settling over me with a numb calm. "You're going to bury me in the foundation. That's what people say you do." Casimiro sighed, the sound of a man bored by his own reputation. He opened his door. If I wanted to kill you, Shannon, I would have let your boyfriend drag you into that alley. It would have been cleaner. Now, get out. I obeyed, not because I trusted him, but because my legs were moving on autopilot. The air out here was sharper, smelling of wet cement and the briny river mud. Casimiro walked to a construction hoist, one of those terrifying, open-air elevators clinging to the side of the building, and punched a code into the keypad. The metal cage rattled open. "We're going up," he commanded. The ride was a screeching, rattling ascent that made my stomach lurch. The wind whipped through the mesh cage, tearing at my dress and tangling my hair across my face. Casimiro stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the lights of Asbury Park shrink below us. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom he intended to burn down and rebuild in his image. The hoist clattered to a halt on the unfinished penthouse floor. There were no walls yet, just concrete pillars and the abyss. The wind howled up here, wild and unchecked. "Look," Casimiro said, gesturing to the sprawling coastline. From this height, the boardwalk looked like a toy set. I could see the flashing lights of the police cruisers near where I dropped my phone too little, too late. I could see the dark expanse of the ocean, endless and indifferent. "I'm building the tallest structure on the Jersey Shore," Casimiro said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. "Luxury condos. Retail. A casino license pending. It's $100 million project." "Good for you," I muttered, hugging my arms to keep warm. "Why am I here?" "Because the zoning board is made up of nervous little men who read too many newspapers." He turned to face me, his back to the drop. "They think I'm a thug. They think this money is dirty. The feds are sniffing around my permits, looking for a reason to shut me down. They want to see a monster." He took a step toward me, invading my personal space. The scent of sandalwood and danger was overwhelming. "I need to show them something else. I need them to see a man who is settling down. A man with a respectable, local fiancé. A civilian. Someone with no criminal record, no connections, just a struggling artist with a pretty face and a sob story that makes me look like a savior." I stared at him, the absurdity of it warring with the terror. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "To distract the feds. Not just a girlfriend. A fiancé. For the summer. Until the permits are signed." "You're insane," I let out a breathless laugh. "I'm not an actress, Casimiro. And I'm certainly not going to aid and abet the Mafia. Take me home." "Home," he repeated the word, testing its weight. "To the apartment with the flimsy deadbolt? To the studio where Richie shattered your window last week?" I saw the police report. They did nothing. My breath hitched. "How do you know about the window?" "I know everything that happens in this town. The police can't help you, Shannon. They are reactive. They draw chalk lines around bodies. They don't stop the bullet. Richie is escalating. Tonight, he broke your phone. Next time, he breaks your neck." The brutality of his words hung in the air between us. He wasn't threatening me. He was stating a fact I had been trying to ignore for months. I looked down at my hands, stained with charcoal, shaking in the cold. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of being afraid. "What are you offering?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Protection," Casimiro said. "Absolute. Terrifying. Total. You wear my ring and you become untouchable. Richie won't just stay away. He will cease to exist in your world. If he looks at you wrong, he answers to me. And I am not a judge who issues pieces of paper." He reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a ring box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a diamond so large it looked vulgar, glittering violently under the moonlight. "A business arrangement," he said. "You play the part. You smile at the galas, you hold my hand at the hearings, you look at me like I'm the love of your life. In exchange, I ensure you live long enough to become the artist you want to be." I pay off your debts. And Richie goes away. I looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. He was a devil, offering me a contract at the top of the world. But looking down at the dark streets where my ex was currently hunting for me, I realized something. I didn't need a hero. Heroes followed the rules. I needed a monster. Lock the doors, I said softly, meeting his gaze. Casimiro smirked, a dangerous, triumphant curve of his lips. He plucked the ring from the velvet and slid it onto my finger. It was heavy, cold. It fit perfectly. Deal. I woke up in a bed that cost more than my entire art school tuition. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and heavy against my skin, smelling of lavender and that distinct, sterile scent of extreme wealth. For a split second, I forgot where I was. I reached for my phone to check the time, but my nightstand was empty. My phone was gone, smashed on the boardwalk. Then the door flew open. It wasn't Casimiro. It was a phalanx of 3 women and 2 men, rolling in racks of clothing and cases of makeup like a tactical assault team invading a bunker. Up, the lead woman barked. She was petite, severe, and dressed entirely in black. Mr. Sabatini expects you ready in 90 minutes. We are behind schedule. Ready for what? I sat up, clutching the sheet. For the narrative, she said, snapping her fingers. The next hour was less like a makeover and more like an autopsy of my former self. They stripped me of my worn leggings and paint-stained oversized t-shirt, my armor against the world, and threw them into a trash bag. I watched them go, feeling a strange panic. Those clothes were invisible. They were safe. In their place came structure. This wasn't the soft, flowy bohemian style I gravitated toward. This was Italian armor. A sheath dress in emerald green that clung to every curve like a second skin, tailored within an inch of its life. Stilettos with heels sharp enough to puncture a lung. Gold jewelry that felt heavy and ancient around my neck. I was being erased. The struggling artist from the boardwalk was being painted over, layer by layer, with foundation, contour, and expensive silk. This channel is built on the idea that no one should ever have to live in fear of their past. We are building a movement to celebrate stories where the underdog finally wins. By subscribing, you're not just watching a video, you're joining a movement that says, no more looking down on others. One subscriber at a time, let's grow this movement to 10,000 strong. When they finally spun the chair around to face the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were lined with sharp wings that made her look dangerous. Her hair was a glossy, dark cascade. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like she owned the building. Adequate, the lead stylist sniffed. I walked out into the main living area, my new heels clicking loudly on the marble floors. Casimiro was waiting by the balcony doors, reading a newspaper. He looked up, his eyes scanning me from the shoes up to the diamond necklace he loaned me. There was no lust in his gaze, just the cold satisfaction of an investor inspecting a renovated property. Better, he said, folding the paper. You looked like a frightened girl. Now you look like a Sabatini. I can't run in these shoes, I said, my voice sharper than usual. Good, he stood up, buttoning his jacket. We don't run anymore, Shannon. We walk. Come. We have lunch reservations. We took the elevator down to the garage, but this time, 2 massive men in dark suits flanked us. My protection squad. We slid into the back of a different car, a silver Rolls-Royce that felt more like a living room than a vehicle. We drove south to Deal, the enclave of old money and private beaches. We pulled up to a beach club that I knew only by reputation, a place with a 5-year waiting list and a membership fee that could buy a house in Asbury. A line of people snaked out the door, tanned and wealthy, waiting to be acknowledged by the gatekeepers. I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I instinctively reached for my purse to find my ID, my hands trembling. The car stopped right at the front entrance. The valet scrambled to open the door before the wheels had even stopped rolling. Casimiro stepped out, adjusting his cuffs, and offered me his hand. As I stepped onto the pavement, the air shifted. The chatter in the line died down. I saw people nudging each other. I saw the flash of recognition and the immediate, instinctive retreat. We didn't wait. We didn't show ID. The manager, a man who looked like he hadn't sweated in 20 years, came rushing out, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Mr. Sabatini, we didn't know you were coming. Please, right this way. The terrace table is open." He ushered us past the velvet rope. I felt the eyes of the people in line burning into my back, not with judgment, but with envy and fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one looking at the ground. I was walking through the fire, and I wasn't getting burned. We were led to a prime table overlooking the ocean, separated from the common crowd by glass partitions and white linen. Waiters materialized with sparkling water and menus before we even sat down. Casimiro leaned back, watching me take it all in. "You see," he asked quietly, "the world works differently when you stop asking for permission." "It's intimidating," I admitted, looking at the menu where the prices were absent. "It is safety," he corrected. "Look at the entrance." I looked back. The security guard at the front was turning away a group of loud guys in muscle shirts, the kind of guys who reminded me of Richie. They were arguing, posturing. The guard just pointed to our table, said something, and the guys looked over. They saw Casimiro. They saw the two men standing behind us. The color drained from their faces. They turned around and walked away without another word. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was something intoxicating. For 2 years, I had flinched at loud noises. I had crossed the street to avoid confrontation. Now, I was sitting next to the monster that scared the other monsters away. Casimiro poured wine into my glass. "Eat, Tesoro," he commanded gently. "You're going to need your strength. Being a queen is exhausting work." "We met at a gallery in Soho," I lied, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. I smiled at the zoning commissioner's wife, tilting my head just the way the stylist had taught me. Casimiro has such an eye for structural beauty. The dinner was a minefield of crystal stemware and loaded questions. We were at a private table in a restaurant where the pasta cost $40 a plate, surrounded by the power players of the Jersey shoreline. I was playing the role of the adoring fiancé, but beneath the silk tablecloth, my leg was bouncing nervously. Then, a shadow fell across our table. "Sabatini," a voice boomed, grating and loud. "I didn't know you came down from the tower." It was Vinny Moretti, a rival developer with a reputation for cutting corners and cheap concrete. He reeked of garlic and arrogance. His eyes slid over Casimiro and landed on me, heavy and leering. He didn't see a person, he saw a prop. "And who's the rental?" Vinny sneered, leaning his knuckles on our table. "Didn't know you were hiring for the season, Cass. Usually, you prefer your assets in brick and mortar." The table went silent. The commissioner's wife gasped softly. I froze, the old shame of being small and helpless clawing at my throat. I waited for the floor to open up. Casimiro didn't shout. He didn't even stand up immediately. He simply set his fork down with a deliberate, metallic clink that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. He looked up at Vinny, his eyes dead and flat. "Vincent," Casimiro said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You are confused." Casimiro stood then, moving with the fluid, lethal grace of a viper uncoiling. He stepped into Vinny's personal space, towering over him. He placed a hand on Vinny's shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly to the room but was clearly agonizing, as Vinny's knees buckled slightly under the pressure. "This is not a rental," Casimiro said, his grip tightening until Vinny winced. "This is my fiancé, and what is mine is untouched. By hands or by words. Do you understand?" I I was just joking, boss, Vinny stammered, sweating instantly. Apologize, Casimiro commanded. To her. Not to me. I'm sorry, miss, Vinny choked out. Leave. Casimiro released him. Vinny scrambled away, disappearing into the bar crowd. Casimiro sat back down and picked up his napkin, his pulse not even elevated. He didn't look at me with affection. He looked at me like I was a vault he had just secured. Eat your risotto, Shannon. It's getting cold. I watched him, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't love, I knew that. He was protecting his property. But as I watched his strong hands cut his steak, a jolt of heat went through me that had nothing to do with fear. For the first time, the monster wasn't chasing me. He was sitting beside me, and God help anyone who tried to get past him. The illusion of safety shattered with a single text message. It wasn't from Richie, he didn't have my new number. It was from my old landlord, Mr. Henderson. A photo attached, my studio door kicked in, splintered wood hanging off the hinges. Inside, my canvases were slashed, ribbons of painted canvas hanging like flayed skin. And scrawled across the wall in red spray paint, whore. I dropped the phone onto the plush carpet of Casimiro's penthouse guest room. The air left my lungs. He knew. Richie knew I wasn't just gone. He knew I was with him, and he was furious. The protection wasn't working. It was just making the beast angrier. Panic, my oldest and most toxic friend, seized my chest. I couldn't stay here. If Richie came after Casimiro, people would get hurt. Or worse, Casimiro would kill him, and I'd be the reason a man died. I had to go. I had to disappear for real this time, maybe California, maybe Mexico. I dragged my old duffel bag out from under the bed. I didn't take the silk dresses or the emeralds. I shoved my sketchbook and a handful of cash into the bag. I was halfway to the door when the lock clicked. Casimiro stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. Going somewhere? He wrecked my studio, I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. He's not stopping, Casimiro. He's going to come here. I can't. I can't do this. So you run, Casimiro said, walking into the room. He didn't try to stop me physically. He just stood there, an immovable object. You run to a bus station? A motel? How long until he finds you there? A week? A month? I don't know. I screamed, the fear finally boiling over. But I can't stay here waiting for the explosion. Shannon is at a crossroads. Go back to the streets she knows or step into the world of the elite. If you love seeing grass to grace stories where someone from a humble background takes on the giants, this is the place for you. Help us hit our goal of 1,000 likes on this video to support more stories of human triumph. Casimiro closed the distance between us. He reached out and gently took the bag from my hand. He tossed it onto the bed. You think running saves you, he said, his voice low and intense. It doesn't. It just tires you out so you're easier to catch. He placed his hands on my shoulders, forcing me to look up at him. His dark eyes burned with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. Stop running, Shannon. You are not prey anymore. You are with me. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. Stand behind me if you are scared. Stand beside me if you are brave. But do not run away from me. We end this. Together. I looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his face. My trembling slowly stopped. I took a breath, letting the scent of sandalwood steady me. Okay, I whispered. I won't run. The Hudson River was an expanse of black velvet, rippling under the moonlight, but the Principessa was a floating supernova. Casimiro's mega yacht was anchored in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, lit up with enough voltage to power a small city. It was the annual pirate party, a tradition among the city's elite that was less about historical accuracy and more about an excuse to wear six-figure costumes and drink vintage rum. The deck was swarming with hedge fund managers in tricorn hats, models in corset dresses that cost more than my car, and politicians pretending they weren't taking bribes near the buffet. I adjusted the bodice of my gown. It was a deep crimson silk, styled vaguely like an 18th century governor's daughter, with a diamond choker that felt heavy against my throat. I stood near the railing, watching a Coast Guard cutter idle in the distance. "Don't worry about them," Casimiro's voice rumbled in my ear. "They're just watching the show like everyone else." He stepped up beside me. He wasn't wearing a silly costume. He wore a tuxedo with a long, black velvet coat draped over his shoulders, looking less like a pirate and more like the captain of a ghost ship. He handed me a glass of champagne. "You're tense," he observed. "There are federal agents 200 yards away," I said, nodding toward the cutter. "And half the people on this boat are probably wearing wires." "Let them listen," Casimiro said, taking a sip of his drink. "They'll only hear the sound of success." "The permits were approved this morning, Shannon. The Azure is officially legitimate." I looked up at him, surprised. "You did it." "We did it," he corrected. He turned to face me, blocking out the chaotic party behind us. The music, a thumping bass remix of a sea shanty, faded into the background. "They saw the ring. They saw the way you defended my vision at the gala. They bought the story." "So, the deal is over?" I asked. A strange, hollow feeling opened up in my chest. I should have been relieved. I was free. I could take my check, pay off my debts, and leave. But the thought of walking off this boat and never seeing him again made my stomach turn. Casimiro looked out at Lady Liberty, her torch glowing green in the night. For the first time since I'd met him, the mask slipped. He looked tired. Not the fatigue of lack of sleep, but the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of a man who has held up the sky for too long. "My father bought his first building in this city with money he made running numbers," Casimiro said quietly. "He told me that in America, you're either the hammer or the nail. I spent my whole life being the hammer. I built walls. I locked doors. I kept everyone out because that is how you survive." He looked back at me, his dark eyes softening. "But tonight, watching you charm the mayor, watching you laugh with my mother on the phone, I realized something. A fortress is just a prison if you're the only one inside." The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face. Casimiro reached out and tucked it behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my cheek. His touch was warm, gentle, a stark contrast to the cold calculation I was used to. "I don't want the deal to be over," I whispered, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. Casimiro stared at me, searching my face for any sign of deception. He found none. "You know what I am, Shannon. I am not a good man. I am a dangerous man." "I know," I said. "But you're the only one who ever made me feel safe." He leaned in, the air between us crackling with electricity. "Safety is easy," he murmured, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "I want to give you the world." He was going to kiss me. I could feel the gravity of it pulling us together, inevitable and terrifying. I closed my eyes, leaning into him. A waiter crashed into us. "Sorry. So sorry, boss," the young man stammered, a tray of empty glasses rattling in his hands. He was wearing a generic striped shirt and a bandana pulled low over his forehead. Casimiro straightened up instantly, the mask slamming back into place. "Watch where you are going," he snapped. The waiter mumbled an apology and hurried toward the lower deck stairs. I watched him go, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. There was something about the way he moved. Something heavy. Something familiar. "Shannon?" Casimiro asked. "That waiter," I said, my voice trembling. "Did you hire him?" "The agency handles the staff." "Why?" "Because," I said, staring at the dark stairwell where the man had disappeared. He was wearing work boots. Heavy, distinct work boots. Richie. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. He wasn't tracking me from Asbury anymore. He was here. On the boat. in the middle of the river. Casimiro, I grabbed his arm. It's him. The music was deafening now, a relentless, pounding beat that vibrated through the teak deck boards. Laughter erupted from a group nearby as someone sprayed a bottle of champagne into the air, the foam glittering under the strobe lights. To everyone else, the party was peaking. To me, the world had just tilted on its axis. Are you sure? Casimiro didn't look around wildly. He didn't panic. He stood perfectly still, his body turning into a monolith of tension under the velvet coat. The boots, I whispered, my throat tight. And the walk. He drags his right foot when he's trying to be quiet. It's him. Casimiro touched his earpiece. Security. Lower deck. Now. We have a breach. He looked at me, his eyes hard. Stay here. Do not move from this railing. No, I said, grabbing his sleeve. If he's down there, he's cutting the power or looking for me in the cabins. He knows I go to the quiet room when I get overwhelmed. He's been studying me for 2 years, Casimiro. Which is why you stay here with the guards. He won't come out if he sees guards. I hissed. He's a coward, but he's a smart coward. If he sees security, he'll hide, wait until we dock, and slip away. Then we're back to looking over our shoulders forever. Casimiro looked at me. He saw the terror in my eyes, yes, but he also saw the resolve. The girl who had jumped into his back seat was gone. The woman standing in front of him was done running. Fine, he said, unclasping the velvet coat and dropping it onto a deck chair. But you stay behind me. We moved toward the stairs. The lower deck was a different world, quiet, dimly lit, the plush carpeting muffling our footsteps. The hallways stretched out, lined with mahogany doors leading to the guest suites. It smelled of lemon polish and the faint, metallic scent of the river water pressing against the hull. We passed the engine room. The hum of the generators was steady. He's not sabotage, Casimiro murmured. He's hunting. We reached the end of the hall. The door to the master suite, where I had left my purse earlier, was ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark carpet. Casimiro motioned for me to stop. He reached into his tuxedo jacket, his hand closing around something heavy. He pushed the door open with his foot. Empty. My purse was dumped on the bed, contents scattered. Lipstick, wallet, compact mirror. He was here, I breathed. Click. The sound came from behind us. From the bathroom. Casimiro spun around, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Richie lunged out of the darkness, a catering knife gleaming in his hand. He wasn't aiming for Casimiro. He was aiming for me. You think you're better than me? Richie screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. I didn't freeze. That was the old Shannon. The new Shannon, who had walked past federal agents and stared down zoning boards, reacted. I grabbed the heavy crystal lamp from the bedside table and swung it with everything I had. It connected with Richie's shoulder with a sickening thud. He yelped, stumbling sideways, the knife slicing harmlessly through the air inches from my arm. Bitch, he roared, turning on me. But he had forgotten the wolf. Casimiro didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He stepped into Richie's space, grabbed the wrist holding the knife, and twisted. There was a sharp snap. Richie shrieked, the knife clattering to the floor. Casimiro drove a knee into Richie's gut, doubling him over, then grabbed him by the back of his cheap catering shirt and slammed him against the mahogany wall. The entire cabin shook. You, Casimiro growled, his voice a low tremor of rage, are trespassing. Richie was gasping for air, clutching his broken wrist. He looked up, his eyes darting between me and Casimiro. He tried to sneer, tried to summon that old bravado. She's mine. You can't. She is not a thing, Casimiro said, his face inches from Richie's. And she certainly isn't yours. Richie spat at him. You're a criminal. A thug. You think you can just take whatever you want. Casimiro wiped his face calmly. He looked at me. Go upstairs, Shannon. Tell the captain to cut the engines. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm going to take out the trash. No, I said. Casimiro paused. Richie looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Yeah, tell him, Shannon. You don't want this. You love me. I walked over to where Richie was pinned against the wall. I looked at the man who had defined my fear for 2 years. He looked small, pathetic, just a bully in a stolen shirt. I don't love you, I said, my voice steady and cold as the ocean outside. I don't even hate you anymore. I just want you gone. I looked at Casimiro. Don't kill him. Richie let out a breathy laugh of relief. See? She knows. If you kill him, I continued, keeping my eyes on Casimiro, the feds outside will hear the splash. They'll find a body. You'll lose the permits. You'll lose the tower. You'll lose us. Casimiro's eyes narrowed. He was listening. He's not worth your empire, Casimiro, I said softly. Tie him up. Call the Coast Guard. Tell them we found a stowaway with a weapon. Let the system you just beat handle him. Let him rot in a cell knowing that we won, and he is nothing. Casimiro looked at Richie, who was now pale, realizing that prison was a far longer, slower suffering than a quick death. Casimiro looked back at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. You really are a queen, he whispered. He hauled Richie up by his collar, dragging him toward the door. You heard the lady. You're going to jail, amico. And I will make sure it is a very, very deep hole. Richie started to beg then, crying, pleading, but I turned my back on him. I walked to the porthole and looked out at the Statue of Liberty. She was still shining. And so was I. The salt air still smelled the same, brine and sugar, but the boardwalk looked different. Or maybe I just looked at it differently. The dilapidated warehouse where I used to hide from the rain was gone. In its place stood the Sabatini Art Center, a gleaming structure of glass and steel that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back across the ocean like a promise. I stood at the podium, the oversized scissors heavy in my hands. A crowd of hundreds stretched out before me, locals, tourists, city officials who used to ignore my permit applications. They were all silent, waiting. I adjusted the microphone. I wasn't wearing a thrift store hoodie. I was wearing a white linen suit, sharp and bright. 3 years ago, I said, my voice carrying clear and steady over the speakers, I stood on this boardwalk and thought my life was over. I thought I had no voice. I thought I had no future. I looked out at the crowd. I saw young artists holding sketch pads, looking up at me with wide eyes. This center is for you, I continued. For the ones who are told to be quiet. For the ones who are told to shrink. We don't shrink here. We build. The applause was thunderous. It washed over me, not scary like the ocean, but warm like the sun. I stepped down from the stage, shaking hands, smiling. But my eyes sought only one person. He was standing near the back, leaning against a black SUV, flanked by his usual security detail. Casimiro. His hair had a touch more gray at the temples now, distinguishing him even more. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me with that same intense, possessive pride he'd had on the yacht. But he wasn't alone. Perched on his hip, clutching a toy boat, was a 2-year-old boy with my eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Leo. I walked through the parting crowd toward them. Casimiro straightened as I approached, shifting Leo to his other arm so he could reach for my hand. You did well, Tesoro, he said, kissing my knuckles. The mayor is terrified of you. Good, I smiled, taking Leo's small hand in mine. He should be. We are on a journey to tell 100 of the most powerful stories on the internet this year. You've seen Shannon go from running in fear to ruling the boardwalk. Don't miss the next chapter of our channel's growth. Be part of something grand, hit that notification bell, and let's reach the top together. Casimiro opened the back door of the car. It was the same sedan. The same beige leather. Ready to go? He asked. Where are we going? Home, he said. The lasagna is waiting. I slid into the back seat, Leo giggling as he climbed over the center console. Casimiro got into the driver's seat. He looked in the rearview mirror, catching my eye. Where to, boss? He asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. I leaned back, watching the boardwalk fade into the distance. I wasn't running away from anything. I was driving toward everything. Just drive, I said. Thud click. The doors locked. But this time, it wasn't to keep the world out. It was to keep the happiness in. The crowd had thinned, leaving only the stragglers and the seagulls to claim the boardwalk. The adrenaline of the speech was beginning to fade, replaced by a warm, heavy contentment that settled deep in my bones. Casimiro opened the back door of the black sedan. It was the same car. The same sleek, intimidating beast that I had thrown myself into 3 years ago, breathless and terrified. I paused, looking at the open door. You know, Casimiro said, leaning an arm on the roof, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, relaxed. You usually sit in the front now. I looked up at him, a mischievous smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I'm feeling nostalgic. I slid onto the beige leather. The sensation was instant and visceral. The air conditioning was humming at that same freezing temperature. Casimiro still ran hot, but this time, it didn't feel like a meat locker. It felt like relief against the humid Jersey afternoon. The smell of the leather mixed with his sandalwood cologne wasn't the scent of a predator anymore. It was the scent of my husband. Casimiro shook his head, a low chuckle vibrating in his chest, and walked around to the driver's side. He slid in, the suspension barely shifting under his weight. The silence inside the cabin was absolute. The noise of the ocean, the distant arcade games, the chatter of the city, it all vanished the moment the heavy doors sealed us in. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. He adjusted the rearview mirror. I looked up, meeting his eyes in the glass. 3 years ago, those eyes had been dark, predatory pools that promised danger. I had looked into them and seen a wolf. Now he looked back at me, and the darkness was still there, but it was protective. It was a shield that kept the world at bay. The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly, a look reserved only for me. You picked the right car this time, Tesoro, he murmured, echoing the words that had started it all. I kicked off my heels, curling my legs up onto the seat, ruining the pristine leather in a way that would have horrified the old Casimiro. He didn't blink. Where to, boss? He asked. I looked out the tinted window at the Asbury skyline. It was my city now. I wasn't hiding in its shadows. I was helping to build its light. But right now, I didn't want to be the queen of the boardwalk. I just wanted to be Shannon. I smiled at him in the mirror. Home. Casimiro put the car in drive. His hand moved to the door panel. Thud click. The sound echoed through the chassis. Heavy. Final. Once, that sound had made my heart stop. It had been the sound of a trap snapping shut. But as we pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the traffic, I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't a trap. It was a promise. The locks weren't there to keep me in anymore. They were there to keep the happiness in.